You just got your paycheck. It's smaller than you expected. It's always smaller than you expected. You do the math in your head, rent, groceries, gas, and the number that's left over feels like a joke. Maybe you open a budgeting app. Maybe you promise yourself this month will be different. But the real answer to why this feels so impossible is far stranger than you don't make enough. $30,000 a year sounds like a number. It is not a number. It is a series of decisions made under pressure, over and over, thousands of times a year. Which bill gets paid first? Which snack gets skipped? Whether tonight is a night you cook or a night you're too tired to, and it costs you $12 extra you didn't plan for. Your brain was never built to make thousands of good decisions under pressure. No one's is. And yet that's exactly what a tight income demands. Not one big financial choice, but a constant stream of small ones, each with real consequences, each one slightly eroding your ability to make the next one well. Let's start with the paycheck itself. $2,500 a month before taxes. After taxes, closer to $2,100. Rent takes a third of that if you're lucky. Some cities, it takes half. Utilities, phone, insurance, food. By the time you've paid for survival, there's maybe $300 left. Sometimes less. And that $300 is supposed to cover emergencies, fun, savings, and the future. All of it. From one number. Compare that to how financial advice usually gets written. Most of it assumes there's fat to trim. Cut the streaming services, cook at home, cancel the gym. But what happens when you've already cut everything? What happens when the streaming service was your only entertainment budget and the gym was the $15 plan? The advice runs out long before the month does. Here's the part nobody tells you. The problem isn't that you're bad with money. The problem is that budgeting on a low income requires more precision, not less. Richard Thaler, the behavioral economist who won the Nobel Prize for showing how humans actually make financial decisions, called this mental accounting. People don't treat money as one interchangeable pool. They split it into buckets in their heads. Rent money, fun money, grocery money, and when you have very little money, every bucket is nearly empty, so one bad week spills into the next. Think about what that means. A person earning $200,000 a year can absorb a mistake, a late fee, an impulse purchase, a forgotten subscription. It barely registers. It gets absorbed into a buffer so large it disappears. But on $30,000, that same $40 mistake can mean the difference between making rent and not. The margin for error isn't just smaller, it's almost gone. This is the part traditional budgeting advice quietly ignores. It treats every dollar as equally forgivable. But when your buckets are nearly empty, one leak drains the whole system. A single overspend in the grocery bucket doesn't stay contained. It borrows from the gas bucket borrows from the emergency bucket, and the emergency bucket, the one meant to catch you, was never actually full to begin with. So why do so many people on a tight income still feel like they're failing at budgeting? Why does it feel personal? This is where the real reframe begins. In 2013, the researchers Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir published a book called Scarcity, based on years of studying poverty, time pressure, and decision-making. Their finding was almost unsettling. Scarcity doesn't just limit your money, it limits your mind. When resources are scarce, whether it's money, time, or even food, the brain narrows its focus onto the immediate problem and loses bandwidth for everything else. They measured this. People under financial strain performed worse on cognitive tests, not because they were less intelligent, but because worry about money was quite literally occupying mental space that would otherwise go toward planning, patience, and long-term thinking. Read that again. Being broke doesn't just cost you money, it costs you the mental bandwidth to stop being broke. It's a loop, and it's not a character flaw. It's a documented cognitive effect, measured in controlled studies, replicated across different populations. In one striking piece of that research, the same farmers were tested before and after harvest. Before harvest, when money was tight, their cognitive performance dropped measurably. After harvest, when money was flowing again, the exact same people scored higher on the exact same tests. Nothing about their intelligence changed. What changed was how much of their mind scarcity was occupying. So when you sit down to make a budget on $30,000 a year and you feel exhausted, foggy, unable to plan 5 steps ahead, that's not laziness. That's scarcity doing exactly what the research says it does. Your brain isn't broken, it's busy, running a background process of worry you didn't choose to install. Now here's the twist. The traditional advice, cut your latte, skip the avocado toast, track every penny in a spreadsheet, spreadsheet was built for people who have slack in their budget. It assumes you have room to optimize. But if you're already spending nearly everything on survival, there's very little left to optimize. Telling someone on $30,000 to save more by cutting small luxuries is like telling someone who's already out of water to just drink less. So what actually works? The historical answer is older than you'd think. Long before modern personal finance influencers, poor households across history used a method now called the envelope system, and versions of it appear across cultures for centuries. In the Great Depression, in post-war households, in immigrant communities managing tight cash flow far before spreadsheets existed. Cash gets divided physically, rent in one envelope, food in another, transportation in a third. Once an envelope is empty, spending in that category stops. No exceptions. No negotiating with yourself in the checkout line. Why does this work better than an app or a spreadsheet for many low-income households? Because it removes the decision. The brain, already taxed by scarcity, doesn't have to calculate a running balance in its head every time it wants to spend. It doesn't have to hold 7 categories and their remaining balances in working memory while standing in a grocery aisle. The system does the calculating for you, physically, visibly, immediately. Modern research on cognitive load supports this directly. Systems that reduce the number of decisions a stressed brain has to make outperform systems that demand constant vigilance, even if the constant vigilance system is theoretically more precise on paper. A spreadsheet asks you to trust your own math under pressure every day. An empty envelope simply tells you no. And for a brain already running low on decision-making capacity, being told no is far easier to accept than having to calculate it yourself. You don't need actual paper envelopes to use this principle. Multiple bank accounts do the same job. A separate account for rent that you never touch for anything else. A separate account for groceries that resets each payday. When the money physically isn't there, in that account, in that moment, the decision has already been made for you. Days earlier, back when your mind had more room to think clearly. That's the real trick. Move the decision to the moment you have the most mental bandwidth, not the moment you have the least. There's a psychological researcher named Roy Baumeister who studied something called decision fatigue. The idea that the quality of your decisions degrades the more decisions you've already made that day. A judge is more likely to deny parole late in the afternoon than in the morning, not because the case has changed, but because the judge's decision-making capacity wore down. If people whose entire job is making careful judgments can wear down by 3 p.m., what happens to you, standing in a grocery aisle at the end of a 10-hour shift, doing invisible math about whether you can afford the good bread or the cheap bread? Now imagine making that same kind of fatigued decision every single time. On $30,000 a year, you're not making one big financial decision. You're making dozens of small, fatiguing ones every single day. Should you take the bus or spend on gas? Should you buy in bulk or buy what fits this week's cash? Should you say yes to a friend's dinner invite or protect the $20 you have left until Friday? Each one alone seems trivial. Stacked across a month, they become the entire shape of your financial life. This is why budgeting on a low income isn't really a math problem. It's a psychology problem wearing a math costume. The numbers are simple. Add, subtract, don't go below 0. What's complicated is doing that arithmetic honestly, dozens of times a day, with a mind that scarcity has already worn thin. So here's the modern mirror. If you're living on $30,000 a year, the goal isn't to build the perfect 12-category spreadsheet. The goal is to remove decisions wherever you can, before your tired mind has to make them in real time. Automate what little savings you can manage, even $5 a paycheck, so it happens before your fatigued brain gets a vote. Separate cash or accounts by purpose, so spending in one area can't quietly swallow another. Pay the bill the day it lands instead of the day it's due, so it never becomes a decision you have to remake at all. And release the idea that not having extra money left over is evidence that you're failing. The data says otherwise. Scarcity itself is the obstacle, not your character. The judge denying parole in the afternoon wasn't a worse judge than the morning version of himself. He was a more depleted one. You, standing in that grocery aisle doing math in your head for the 5th time today, aren't worse at money than someone earning triple your salary. You're simply doing it with less room and a more tired mind. There's a strange kind of relief in that. You're not bad at budgeting. You're operating a mind that scarcity has narrowed, using tools that were often designed for people who never had to think this way in the first place. The people who study this for a living have shown, again and again, that structure beats willpower when the margin for error disappears. Not motivation, not discipline. Structure. Something external that makes the decision so you don't have to make it while exhausted. You still have that paycheck open in your other tab. It's still small. smaller than you wanted. But maybe the real answer was never about the number after all.